They met by accident, literally. A hot cup of coffee, a moment's clumsiness, an old man's furious glare were all it took to start something that would change her life. She thought she would never see him again. She was wrong. Months later, in the middle of an important meeting, he walked in wearing the title no one in the room could outrank. What happened next shocked everyone. And it was only the beginning. Before we continue, let us know in the comments where you are watching from today and what time you are currently watching this video. If you enjoy stories like this, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more. It was one of those mornings where nothing seemed to go right. Sophia Morgan hurried to a crowded Lagos airport terminal, clutching her boarding pass in one hand and a steaming paper cup of coffee in the other. Her phone buzzed nonstop with work emails, and her gate number had changed twice in the last 10 minutes. She was late, stressed, and running on barely 4 hours of sleep. The terminal was alive with noise, flight announcements echoing overhead, rolling suitcases clattering across the tile floor, children whining, and a faint smell of disinfectant mixed with fried food from the nearby food court. Sophia wove her way through the crowd like a determined fish swimming upstream. She didn't notice him at first. The man was standing near the departure board, wearing a dark wool coat despite the humid air. His face was set in a permanent scowl, like the world had personally wronged him. He had a strong, square jaw and thin lips pressed tightly together. His gray hair was neatly combed back, but his eyes were cold, sharp, assessing. It happened in seconds. Someone cut across her path, forcing her to sidestep, and in that instant, her elbow collided with something solid. The coffee cup jolted, tilted, and then, watch where you're going, the man barked, jerking backward as hot coffee splattered across his coat. Sophia froze, her mouth dropping open. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to. You didn't mean to? Do you even look where you're going? His voice was deep and harsh, drawing a few curious stares from nearby travelers. She fumbled in her bag for tissues, hands shaking. Let me help. Just don't, he snapped, brushing at the stain. You've ruined this coat. Do you have any idea what it costs? Heat rushed to her cheeks. People were staring now. She wanted to disappear into the floor. I said I'm sorry. I'll pay for dry cleaning. Forget it. He turned away, muttering something under his breath that she couldn't quite catch, but the tone was unmistakable. Before she could say anything else, he stalked off toward the far side of the terminal, his stride fast and rigid. Sophia stood there for a few seconds, her heart pounding, before forcing herself to move on. She had a plane to catch. By the time she reached her gate, she had convinced herself it didn't matter. The man was just a grumpy stranger she would never see again. Airports were full of brief, forgettable encounters. Or so she thought. The next few weeks passed in a blur. Sophia worked as an assistant project manager at a mid-sized marketing firm in Victoria Island, juggling deadlines, client demands, and her boss's impossible expectations. She tried not to think about the coffee incident, though every now and then the man's glare would flash in her mind. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, her boss, Martin, called her into his glass-walled office. He was a tall, thin man with a habit of tapping his pen when he was impatient. Sophia, he said, not looking up from his computer, we've got a big meeting coming up. A new corporate partner is sending someone high-level to review our operations. I want you in the meeting. Take notes. Stay sharp. Got it, she said, scribbling the details in her notebook. The following Monday, the office buzzed with a strange kind of nervous energy. People straightened their desks, checked their hair in their monitors, and rehearsed presentations. Martin paced the hallway, muttering about first impressions. Sophia sat in the conference room, laptop open, trying to look composed. She had no idea who this high-level visitor would be, only that everyone seemed to treat the event like the arrival of royalty. Then the door opened. In walked a man in a perfectly tailored navy suit, flanked by two senior executives. His posture was straight, his expression unreadable. But the moment Sophia's eyes met his, her stomach dropped. It was him, the grumpy old man from the airport. For a heartbeat, she couldn't breathe. Memories of the spilled coffee, the raised voice, the stares of strangers, everything came rushing back. But now he wasn't just a stranger in a coat. Martin sprang to his feet. Mr. Caldwell, welcome. We're honored to have you here. Caldwell. So that was his name. Let's get started, Caldwell said, his voice just as deep and firm as she remembered. His eyes flicked briefly toward Sophia, lingering for the smallest moment before moving on. She kept her head down, typing furiously as the meeting began. The presentations went smoothly at first. Martin outlined their current projects, their marketing strategies, and upcoming campaigns. Caldwell listened in silence, occasionally asking sharp, precise questions that made even senior staff sweat. Sophia stayed quiet, but she could feel his gaze on her every now and then. Was it her imagination, or was there a faint curl of amusement in his expression whenever their eyes met? An hour into the meeting, Caldwell asked for a progress report on one of their biggest accounts. Martin hesitated, then looked at Sophia. Sophia, pull up the latest figures, he said. Her fingers flew over the keyboard. opening spreadsheets and charts. She explained the data, careful to keep her voice steady. When she finished, Caldwell leaned back in his chair. Interesting. And what's your take on the client's engagement trend? The question startled her. He wasn't asking Martin. He was asking her directly. I think the numbers suggest a plateau, she said after a moment. We might need to introduce a fresh campaign to reignite interest, maybe something interactive that makes the brand feel more personal. Caldwell's expression didn't change, but his eyes narrowed slightly, as if evaluating her. Then he nodded once. Noted. The rest of the meeting passed without incident, but by the end, Sophia's nerves were frayed. As people began to leave, Caldwell spoke quietly to Martin. Whatever he said made Martin glance at her, then nod. Sophia gathered her things, eager to escape, but Caldwell's voice stopped her. Miss Morgan, he said, his tone neutral. Walk with me. Her pulse quickened. She followed him down the hallway, past curious co-workers. They stopped near the elevator. I trust you remember me, he said finally. She swallowed. Yes. From the airport. His mouth twitched, whether in irritation or amusement. She couldn't tell. I believe we have some unfinished business. Sophia's mind was racing as the elevator doors slid open. The polished metal reflected her own nervous face, while Mr. Caldwell stepped in with the same controlled confidence he carried in the meeting. She hesitated a second before following him inside. He pressed a button for the ground floor, without looking at her. The elevator hummed to life. I'm guessing you didn't expect to see me today, he said finally, his deep voice echoing in the enclosed space. No, I didn't, she admitted. I'm also guessing you didn't think much about our first meeting, he continued, his eyes fixed on the numbers above the door. Sophia bit her lip. It was an accident. I really am sorry about the coffee. He gave a short, dry chuckle, though it sounded more like air escaping than genuine amusement. I'm not interested in apologies, Miss Morgan. I'm interested in work. You're in my company now, and I take note of people, even the ones who spill coffee on me. The elevator stopped with a soft ding, and they stepped into the lobby. The receptionist had popped up, eyes following them as Caldwell led the way outside. Rain misted down, coating the pavement in a silver sheen. Caldwell paused just under the building's awning and looked at her directly for the first time that day. His gaze was sharp, but there was something else, something unreadable. You spoke up in that meeting, he said. Most assistants keep quiet. You didn't. Sophia shifted under his stare. I was just answering your question. Exactly, he said. You didn't dodge it. You didn't defer to your boss. You gave me an honest assessment. She wasn't sure if that was a compliment or a warning. Caldwell's phone buzzed, and he glanced at it briefly. I'll be back in this office in 3 weeks. In the meantime, consider this, your work will be under my radar. Before she could reply, he stepped into a waiting black car, the driver already holding the door open. In seconds, the vehicle melted into the traffic. The rest of the day was strange. People whispered in corners about Caldwell's visit. Some staff seemed relieved he'd gone. Others looked rattled. Martin called her into his office again, just before closing time. What did Caldwell want with you? Martin asked, leaning back in his chair. Sophia kept her answer short. He just talked about my input in the meeting. Martin's eyes narrowed slightly, as if trying to read between her words. Be careful around him. He notices everything. And when he notices someone, it usually means one of two things, promotion or trouble. That didn't help her nerves. Over the next 2 weeks, Sophia worked harder than ever. She stayed late, checked every report twice, and handled clients with extra care. But she couldn't shake the feeling that Caldwell was somehow still watching, even from a distance. One Friday evening, just as she was packing up, Martin appeared at her desk. We've got an issue. The Bellington account is falling apart. Caldwell's been getting updates from them directly, and they're not happy. I need you to join me for a meeting at their office tomorrow morning. Tomorrow? That's Saturday, she said before she could stop herself. I know, but if we lose them, it's a huge hit to the company. And to be honest, Caldwell will be breathing down my neck if this isn't fixed. She nodded reluctantly. The Bellington office was in a high-rise downtown, with floor-to-ceiling windows and sharp, modern furniture. The client, a tall woman named Mrs. Harding, looked annoyed from the moment they arrived. This campaign isn't connecting, Mrs. Harding said, tapping her pen against the table. We pour money into it, but the engagement is dropping. Martin tried to explain the adjustments they were planning, but Mrs. Harding wasn't convinced. Sophia listened quietly, watching her body language, until she noticed something. Excuse me, Sophia said gently. May I show you something? Mrs. Harding glanced at her, eyebrows raised. Sophia pulled out her laptop and opened a set of mock-up designs she'd been working on quietly for another client. These are for a different brand, but the idea can be adapted to yours. It focuses on making the audience feel like they're part of the story, instead of just watching it. Mrs. Harding leaned forward, interest replacing her earlier irritation. That's actually not bad. By the end of the meeting, the client agreed to give the campaign another shot, using Sophia's concept as a foundation. As they left the building, Martin looked at her with surprise. You just saved that account. I didn't even know you were working on ideas like that. Sophia shrugged. Sometimes I can't help thinking ahead. On Monday morning, Sophia's phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Well handled at Bellington. See, her stomach flipped. Caldwell. He hadn't been in the meeting, but somehow he knew exactly what had happened. The next few days were a mix of normal tasks and strange little moments. An email from Caldwell asking her to clarify a figure in a report. Even though it wasn't addressed to him, a call from his assistant requesting a background summary on a project he'd only mentioned in passing during his visit. It was like he was testing her, without saying so. 3 weeks later, he returned. The office felt different the moment he walked in. Conversations dropped to whispers. People straightened their clothes. Even Martin looked tense. The day's schedule was packed. Client reviews, strategy sessions, and an internal performance check. Caldwell insisted on leading himself. Sophia found herself in the conference room again, taking notes while Caldwell dissected each department's output. He was blunt but never raised his voice. Somehow, that made his critiques sharper. When the session ended, most people left quickly, eager to escape the tension. But Caldwell stayed seated, scrolling through something on his tablet. Miss Morgan, he said without looking up, join me in my office. Martin blinked. You mean my office? Caldwell finally looked up. No, my office. It took a moment for that to sink in. Apparently, Caldwell had a private workspace in the building that no one had mentioned before. His office was nothing like the rest of the company's space. Dark with shelves lined one wall, filled with neatly arranged books and files. A large desk sat near the window, with a view of the city skyline. Everything was organized, minimal, deliberate. He gestured for her to sit. You've been on my radar since the airport, he began. At first, for the wrong reason. But since then, you've handled yourself. Interestingly. Sophia stayed quiet, unsure where this was going. I don't waste time on people who blend in, he continued. You don't blend in. That's why I'm going to give you something outside your job description. She leaned forward slightly. What kind of something? Caldwell's eyes narrowed, a hint of challenge in them. A task that could either open a door for you, or close it permanently. Sophia's fingers tightened slightly on the arm of the chair. What kind of task? She asked again, her voice steady but her pulse quickening. Caldwell leaned back, folding his hands. There's a client we're courting, a high-stakes account. Their contract alone is worth more than your department's yearly budget. They're cautious, secretive, and easily put off. I need someone to attend an informal dinner with their representatives. Someone observant. Someone who can listen more than they talk. Sophia frowned. Why me? Wouldn't that be something for a senior manager? He shook his head. They expect managers. They watch them too closely. I want them relaxed. You'll be there as part of the team, but not the center of attention. That way you can tell me what really happened in that room. The weight of what he was saying sank in. So, you want me to spy? I want you to notice, Caldwell corrected. There's a difference. He stood and walked around his desk until he was standing beside her. This is not an assignment to take lightly. You'll be representing me. If you fail, it reflects on me. And if it reflects on me, he let the sentence trail off. But the meaning was crystal clear. The dinner was set for Thursday evening at a quiet upscale restaurant on Island. The kind with soft lighting, low music, and waiters who seemed to peer out of thin air. Sophia arrived early, her nerves wound tight. She wore a navy dress, professional but not stiff, and carried a small notepad in her bag, just in case she needed to jot down anything later. She spotted Caldwell almost immediately, seated at a corner table with a glass of still water in front of him. His eyes flicked up as she approached. Good, he said simply. You're on time. 2 men and a woman soon joined them, the client's representatives. They were polite, their smiles perfectly in place, but Sophia noticed their eyes. They scanned everything, the table, the wine list, each other, as if constantly calculating. The conversation started light. The weather, Lagos traffic, the restaurant's menu. Sophia stayed quiet, just as Caldwell had instructed, but she listened closely. When the waiter took orders, she noticed one of the men, Mr. Lang, hesitate before picking a wine. Glancing at the woman, Ms. Duru, as if seeking approval, she gave the faintest nod. Later, when Caldwell asked about the company's future plans, Ms. Duru answered with practiced smoothness, but her hands tightened slightly around her glass when the topic of partnerships came up. Sophia filed away every small detail. Halfway through the meal, Caldwell excused himself to take a phone call, leaving Sophia with the 3 representatives. She smiled politely, making small talk about the food. Mr. Lang leaned in slightly. So, how long have you worked for? Caldwell. A few months, she replied. I'm still learning a lot. Ms. Duru's gaze sharpened. And how do you find him? Sophia gave a diplomatic smile. He's very focused. That seemed to amuse them. They exchanged quick glances, as if sharing an unspoken joke. When Caldwell returned, The conversation shifted back to business. But now Sophia noticed something new. Whenever Caldwell pressed a point, Mr. Lang's foot tapped on the table, and Miss Duru's smile grew tighter. The dinner ended with polite goodbyes. Outside, the warm night air wrapped around them as Caldwell walked her toward the parking area. "Well," he asked. "They follow Miss Duru's lead," Sophia said immediately. "Even when the others talk, they look to her first. And she doesn't like the idea of new partnerships. She hides it well, but she tenses up when the topic comes up." Caldwell's lips curved slightly. Not quite a smile, but close. "Not bad. I'll remember that." She exhaled, realizing only then how tense she'd been the whole night. The next morning, the office felt different again. Caldwell's private meetings ran back to back, and by midday, a rumor was spreading that the high-stakes client had agreed to consider a trial project with the company. Martin stopped by Sophia's desk, looking half surprised, half suspicious. "I heard you were at dinner with Caldwell and the clients last night." "I was," she said, keeping her voice neutral. He studied her for a long moment. "Be careful. Caldwell doesn't involve people for no reason." She wasn't sure if that was meant as advice or a warning. 2 days later, Caldwell's assistant, a brisk woman named Claire, appeared at her desk. "Mr. Caldwell wants you in his office. Now." Sophia followed her, wondering what could possibly come next. Inside, Caldwell was reviewing a thick file. Without looking up, he said, "We've got a problem." He slid the file toward her. Inside were printed emails, performance charts, and a summary sheet with the word "confidential" stamped across the top. "Someone in this office is feeding inside information to one of our competitors," Caldwell said. "It's subtle, just enough to undercut our proposals. I need someone who can pay attention without drawing attention." Her heart thudded. "You want to find out who?" He finally looked at her. "I want you to watch. Keep your eyes open. Notice who reacts when certain projects are mentioned. Notice who asks the wrong kind of questions. And don't tell anyone, not even Martin." The next week felt like walking a tightrope. Sophia went about her normal tasks, but her senses were heightened. She noticed how one junior manager always seemed to linger near the printers when sensitive documents were left there. How another employee, a cheerful woman from accounting, asked unusually detailed questions about upcoming proposals that weren't her department's concern. But the oddest moment came on Wednesday afternoon. Sophia was in the break room when she overheard 2 staffers whispering. "Caldwell's going to find out soon," one of them said. "Not if they keep looking in the wrong place," the other replied, lowering his voice even further. She pretended to stir her tea, straining to catch more, but the conversation stopped abruptly when they noticed her. That evening, as she was leaving, she found Caldwell waiting near the elevators. "Well," he asked quietly. "I'm seeing patterns," she said carefully, "but it's too soon to be sure." He nodded once. "Good. Don't rush. I'd rather have certainty than guesses." The elevator arrived, but as she stepped in, he added, "Miss Morgan, remember this. In this business, knowing the truth is only half the battle. The other half is knowing when to speak it." By the following Monday, Sophia was convinced of 2 things. First, someone in the office was deliberately leaking information. Second, Caldwell had chosen her to observe because he suspected she wouldn't be on anyone's radar. The challenge was that she still had to do her regular job without letting anyone know she was watching. That meant meetings, emails, project updates, while also noticing small details others ignored. That morning, Martin called an urgent staff meeting about a new proposal for an electronics brand. The project was still in early development, and Caldwell had made it clear that details were to be kept strictly internal, as Martin explained the broad outline. Sophia noticed one thing. Paul, the junior manager who liked hanging around the printers, scribbled furiously in a small notebook. Not unusual in itself, except that Paul wasn't assigned to this project at all. Later, during the lunch break, she walked past the copy room and saw Paul again, this time slipping a piece of paper into his laptop bag before quickly zipping it shut. By midweek, her list of possible suspects had grown to 3. Paul, the overly curious accountant named Lillian, and a marketing associate called Victor, who always seemed to know more about competitors than he should. But suspicion was enough. She needed something concrete. The opportunity came on Thursday afternoon. She stayed late to finish a report and noticed Victor in the hallway, talking quietly on his phone. His back was to her, but she caught fragments of his words. "Yes, before the end of the week." "No, they don't know yet." When he turned, he startled slightly at seeing her, then forced a smile. "Working late too?" "Yeah," she replied, pretending not to notice his sudden shift in tone. The next day, Caldwell returned unexpectedly. His presence put the entire office on edge again. At noon, Claire came to Sophia's desk with a now familiar summons. "He wants to see you." In his office, Caldwell gestured for her to sit. "Report." Sophia laid it out plainly. Paul's suspicious note-taking, Lillian's unusual questions, Victor's strange phone call. She made sure to describe each observation, without jumping to conclusions. Caldwell listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he said, We're going to run a test. A test? I'll plant a piece of false information, something harmless but believable, and I'll make sure each suspect hears a slightly different version. Then we'll see which version comes back to me through channels it shouldn't. It was a simple plan, but one that required precision. That afternoon, the trap was set. Caldwell spoke to Paul in passing, dropping a hint that the electronics brand wanted to shift their campaign toward younger audiences. With Lillian, he casually mentioned that the budget for the project might be doubled. To Victor, he hinted about a possible partnership with a foreign tech company. Sophia's job was to stay alert for any sign that one of these facts had leaked. The results came faster than either of them expected. On Monday morning, Caldwell strode into the office, holding a printout. Our competitor just launched a teaser campaign aimed at younger audiences, he said flatly. The same direction I told Paul. Sophia felt a jolt of adrenaline. It was him. Caldwell dismissed the staff and motioned for her to follow him into his office. That's enough proof for me, he said. But I want to know how far this goes. He might not be working alone. How we find out, she asked. We let him think he's still unnoticed, and we watch who he talks to. For the next week, she tracked Paul's movements discreetly. He often had lunch with Victor, though their conversation seemed casual on the surface. Other times, he lingered at Lillian's desk. Then, one Thursday afternoon, she spotted something that made her stop cold. Paul was in the parking garage, talking to a man leaning against a silver sedan. The man was in his late 40s, wearing a crisp suit and no tie. She recognized him instantly. He was a senior executive at their main competitor. She ducked behind a concrete pillar, straining to hear. It's risky, Paul was saying. The executive replied, Caldwell doesn't suspect you. Just get me the timelines for the next quarter. Sophia's pulse hammered. She waited until they parted ways, then hurried upstairs. Caldwell was still in his office, reviewing a document. We have a bigger problem, she said quietly, closing the door behind her. She told him exactly what she'd seen. His eyes narrowed, but his voice stayed calm. Good work. Now we can deal with it properly. The following day, Caldwell called a private meeting with the company's legal team. Sophia wasn't present for the discussion, but when he emerged, his face was set in stone. Paul will be gone by Monday, he said simply. By Monday morning, Paul's desk was empty. No explanation was given to the rest of the staff, but the atmosphere in the office felt lighter, though also more cautious, as if everyone realized Caldwell's eyes could be anywhere. Later that week, Sophia received a short email from him. Effective immediately, you will report directly to me for special projects. Her breath caught as she read it. Working directly under Caldwell wasn't something that happened to assistants like her. It was either the start of a career-changing rise, or the kind of pressure that could break her. When she went to his office to acknowledge the email, he simply said, You've proven you can handle discretion. Let's see if you can handle responsibility. The first assignment under her new special projects role came almost immediately. A 2-day business trip to Abuja for a confidential meeting with a potential investor. Caldwell made it clear this was not just a trip for presentations. He wanted her to assess the investor's sincerity, his stability, and whether he had hidden motives. You see what most people miss, he told her before they boarded the flight. That's why you're here. The trip was her first time traveling with him in a professional capacity, and it felt nothing like the airport encounter months ago. This time, she wasn't a clumsy stranger spilling coffee. She was part of his inner circle. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that working this closely with Caldwell meant stepping into deeper waters, where the currents could turn dangerous without warning. The flight to Abuja was quiet at first. Caldwell spent most of the time reading reports on his tablet, while Sophia sat beside him with her own laptop open, reviewing the background on a potential investor. His name was Charles Obasai, a wealthy businessman with a clean public image, but very little detail about where his fortune had originally come from. His company had interests in real estate, logistics, and agriculture, but most of his deals were handled through shell companies and intermediaries. You see why I don't take him at face value, Caldwell said without looking up from his tablet. Sophia nodded. He's careful about what people know. That's one word for it, Caldwell replied. They landed in Abuja late in the afternoon, greeted by a humid breeze and a driver holding a placard with Caldwell's name. The car took them straight to a quiet boutique hotel, upscale but not flashy. Caldwell preferred places that kept their guests' names off public records. That evening, they met Obasai at a private dining room in the hotel restaurant. He was in his mid-50s, tall, with a warm smile and a voice that carried across the room. He greeted Caldwell like an old friend and turned to Sophia with equal charm. And you are? He asked. Sophia Morgan, she said politely. I work with Mr. Caldwell on special projects. Obasai chuckled. Special projects? Sounds important. It can be, Caldwell replied smoothly before she could answer. Dinner started pleasantly enough. Grilled fish, fresh vegetables, soft music in the background. Obasai spoke about his investments and hinted at a vision for expanding into West African markets. Sophia listened carefully. His words were polished, But every now and then his smile tightened, especially when Caldwell pressed him about his company's financing. She noticed something else. Obasai avoided giving direct answers to questions about his logistics arm. Instead, he deflected to anecdotes about successful deals in agriculture. Halfway through the evening, Caldwell excused himself for a brief phone call. As soon as he left, Obasai leaned toward Sophia. "You've worked with him long?" "Not very long," she said. He smiled. "Then I'll give you a little advice. Caldwell is ambitious. He'll expect you to match his pace. But ambition like that burns people out." She kept her expression neutral. "I can handle pressure." Obasai said, studying her. "We'll see." When Caldwell returned, the tone of the conversation shifted. Business talk resumed, but now Sophia felt a current beneath the surface. Two men testing each other without showing it. After the meeting, back in the hotel elevator, Caldwell asked, "What did he say while I was gone?" Sophia told him. Caldwell's jaw tightened slightly. "He wanted to see if you'd bite." "You didn't." "Good." The next day, they visited one of Obasai's warehouses on the outskirts of the city. The building was massive, with rows of shipping containers stacked like giant bricks. Obasai's staff gave them a guided tour, explaining the efficiency of their distribution network. But Sophia noticed something odd. There were entire sections of the warehouse sealed off, guarded by men who didn't look like regular security. They wore no uniforms, just plain clothes, but their eyes scanned every movement. When she quietly asked their guide about it, he shrugged. "Those are restricted areas, not part of today's tour." Later, in the car, she told Caldwell. He didn't respond right away, just stared out the window as the city passed by. "That's the kind of thing I wanted to know," he said finally. That evening, Caldwell arranged a follow-up meeting in the hotel lounge. It was less formal, just drinks and casual talk. Obasai arrived wearing a light linen suit, looking relaxed. They discussed potential terms for a joint venture, but Sophia noticed that Caldwell kept steering the conversation back to logistics, routes, storage, customs clearance. Each time, Obasai gave vague answers, as if he didn't want to commit to specifics. At one point, Obasai excused himself to take a call. Caldwell turned to Sophia. "You see it, don't you?" "Yes," she said. He's avoiding details about his logistics operations, and the warehouse security didn't feel normal. Caldwell nodded. "We're not going to sign anything until we know exactly what's behind those locked doors." The next morning, their driver took them to the airport for the return flight. On the way, Caldwell was quiet, lost in thought. When they finally boarded, he looked at her and said, "You've done well. You see things most people overlook. That's useful." For Sophia, it was the closest thing to praise she'd ever heard from him. Back in Lagos, she slipped back into her regular office routine, but not for long. 2 days later, Caldwell called her into his office. "We're moving on a different matter now. I need you to attend a board meeting with me tomorrow. You'll sit in, take notes, and pay attention to the reactions, not the speeches." She frowned. "Is something wrong with the board?" "Something's wrong with one of them," he said simply, "and I intend to find out what." The board meeting was held in the company's largest conference room, a sleek space with a long table, leather chairs, and a wall of windows that flooded the room with sunlight. The agenda covered financials, new ventures, and internal restructuring. Sophia sat slightly behind Caldwell, her laptop open, scanning faces as each topic came up. When the subject of the electronics brand project was raised, most members nodded in approval, but one man, Mr. Adewale, shifted uncomfortably, tapping his pen against the table. Later, during a discussion about expanding into new regions, Adewale asked oddly pointed questions about risk exposure, as if fishing for specific figures. Sophia made careful notes. After the meeting, Caldwell asked for her impressions. "Adewale," she said immediately. "He reacts differently when certain projects are mentioned, almost like he's worried about something specific." Caldwell's gaze sharpened. "I thought so. Keep watching him." Quietly. By the end of the week, Sophia was juggling her regular work with silent observations that seemed to carry higher and higher stakes. She knew she was in deep now, no longer just an assistant, but a trusted pair of eyes in situations where one wrong step could cost people their jobs. Or worse, their reputations. And yet, she couldn't help wondering, if Caldwell trusted her this much, what was the real reason he had chosen her? The next Monday began like any other, until Caldwell appeared at Sophia's desk just after 9 a.m. "Walk with me," he said. They moved down the hallway, past the hum of ringing phones and clattering keyboards, until they reached the far end of the floor. Caldwell pushed open a door Sophia had never seen used before. Inside was a small, private conference room with tinted glass walls. He closed the door behind them. "Adewale has been talking to people outside the company," he said without preamble. "I don't know exactly what he's saying yet, but I intend to find out. You're going to help me." Sophia's pulse quickened. "How?" "You'll attend tomorrow's budget committee meeting. Sit where you can see Adewale clearly. Watch his face when we discuss the electronics brand, and again when we talk about regional expansion. I'll handle the questions. You focus on his reactions. She nodded. The following day, she arrived early and claimed a seat along the side wall, giving her a perfect view of the table. Adewale walked in 5 minutes later, greeting people politely, but his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. The meeting began with routine updates. Sophia kept her gaze steady, noting every flicker of movement from Adewale. When Caldwell introduced the topic of the electronics brand, Adewale's shoulders stiffened almost imperceptibly. He began tapping his pen again, faster this time. Later, during the discussion on regional expansion, Caldwell casually asked the finance director to project the expected revenue. As soon as the number was read aloud, Adewale leaned back slightly, crossing his arms, his jaw tightening. To anyone else, it might have seemed like boredom. To Sophia, it was the same defensive posture she'd seen in Obesai's warehouse tour, someone hiding discomfort. After the meeting, she found Caldwell in his office. He's definitely reacting. It's not random. Both times he mentioned those projects, he changed his posture and the pen tapping started. Caldwell nodded slowly. Then it's time to push him. That push came 2 days later. Caldwell called another board session, this one shorter and more targeted. Midway through, he announced, I'll be recommending a new oversight process for our regional expansion. I'll also be leading negotiations personally with the electronics brand. It was subtle, but Sophia saw it. Adewale's lips pressed together, his eyes flicking briefly toward another board member, as if seeking silent confirmation. When the meeting ended, Adewale left quickly, not making eye contact. The following morning, Caldwell asked Sophia to follow him down to the building's cafe. They sat at a corner table with 2 cups of black coffee. Tell me exactly what you saw, he said. She described the look Adewale had given the other board member. Caldwell's eyes narrowed. That's the connection I was looking for. He's not acting alone. That afternoon, Caldwell put a quiet plan in motion. He scheduled a private update meeting with both Adewale and the other board member, Mr. Kalu. He invited Sophia to sit in under the pretense of taking minutes. For the first 10 minutes, the discussion was bland numbers, deadlines, staffing updates. Then Caldwell casually mentioned that the electronics brand might be ready to sign within the week. Kalu glanced at Adewale almost instantly. Adewale gave the faintest shake of his head, as if warning him. Sophia caught it. She kept her expression neutral, typing the moment into her notes. After the meeting, Caldwell said nothing until they were back in his office with the door shut. They're working together, Sophia said. Yes, Caldwell replied. Now the question is, for whom? The answer came sooner than expected. The next morning, Caldwell received an anonymous tip. Someone had forwarded parts of the electronics brand proposal to a rival firm. Sophia watched him read the email, his face calm, but his grip on the paper tightening. I want proof, he said, not rumors. Over the next week, Caldwell arranged for certain draft documents, again, with harmless but unique details, to be given separately to Adewale and Kalu. Just like with Paul, each got slightly different numbers. For days later, one of those unique numbers appeared in a competitor's pitch. The number had been given to Adewale. That was enough. Caldwell moved swiftly. Legal was brought in, the evidence compiled. By the end of the week, Adewale's access was revoked, and he was escorted out by security. Kalu resigned the next morning, without explanation. The company was buzzing with speculation, but Caldwell kept his expression as unreadable as ever. Late Friday afternoon, he called Sophia into his office. You've been in the middle of 3 situations now, Paul, Obesai, and Adewale. In each one, you noticed details that made the difference. She hesitated. I was just doing what you asked. No, Caldwell said. You were doing more than that, which is why you're coming with me to Accra next week. There's a deal on the table that will make these other problems look like warm-up exercises. Over the weekend, Sophia wondered what exactly that meant. Working with Caldwell had already pulled her into situations that felt far above her original job description. If Accra was bigger than this, what would she be walking into? The trip began early Wednesday morning. The flight was smooth, but Caldwell was quiet, reviewing documents and making notes in his precise handwriting. Their destination was a modern glass tower in the center of Accra's business district, home to a multinational tech firm looking for a strategic marketing partner. The first meeting was cordial, smiles, polite greetings, small talk about markets and trends. But Sophia noticed something almost immediately. One of the executives, a man named Mensa, kept steering the conversation toward Caldwell's past partnerships, specifically asking about times when deals had collapsed. It was subtle, but to Sophia, it felt like a fishing expedition. That evening, over dinner at the hotel, she mentioned it to Caldwell. He's probing for weaknesses, Caldwell agreed. The question is why and for whose benefit. The next day's meeting would be critical. Sophia knew that by now, her role wasn't just note-taking. She was there to read the undercurrent, to catch what others missed. And the more she worked with Caldwell, the more she began to realize every room had an undercurrent. You just had to be the one paying attention. The second morning in Accra began with heavy clouds hanging low over the city. From her hotel window, Sophia could see the streets already alive, yellow taxis weaving between buses, street vendors waving at early customers, the distant honk of impatient drivers cutting through the humid air. She met Caldwell in the lobby. He was dressed in a crisp gray suit, the kind that made him look like he belonged in any boardroom in the world. He didn't say much, just nodded for her to follow. Their driver wove through traffic toward the glass tower again. Sophia clutched her tablet, reviewing notes from the previous day. She kept coming back to one thought, Mensa's strange questions. Inside the building, they were ushered into a large conference room with a sweeping view of the city. This time, there were more people present. 3 new executives alongside Mensa, all wearing sharp expressions that didn't quite match the polite words. The meeting started with a review of marketing plans. Caldwell spoke with his usual precision, guiding the conversation firmly. But Sophia kept her eyes moving. She noticed how Mensa didn't take notes. He only listened, nodding slowly whenever Caldwell mentioned budget numbers. Halfway through, one of the new executives, a woman named Jay, asked about exclusivity clauses. Her tone was casual. But Sophia saw her glance quickly at Mensa as soon as the question left her mouth. Caldwell answered without hesitation, but Sophia scribbled the moment down. The glances were too frequent to be accidental. During the coffee break, Caldwell stepped out to make a call. Sophia lingered near the refreshments table, pouring herself a small cup. She heard a hushed conversation entwee behind her. She didn't understand the words, but the tone, low, urgent, almost tense, made her turn slightly. Mensa was speaking to Jay, his hands gesturing sharply before he noticed her glance, and abruptly ended the conversation. Sophia walked away, pretending to look for sugar, but her mind was already piecing things together. Back in the meeting, Caldwell unveiled a projected timeline for rollout. It was aggressive, but doable. Sophia noticed Mensa's jaw tighten again, just like Adewale's had back in Lagos. When Caldwell finished, Mensa leaned back. This seems rushed. Perhaps we should delay negotiations until next quarter. It would give everyone more time to prepare. Caldwell didn't blink. The market won't wait. If this partnership is going to work, we'll need to move quickly. A faint shadow crossed Mensa's face. It wasn't frustration. It was calculation. Afterward, in the car back to the hotel, Caldwell asked, "What did you see?" "They're aligned," Sophia said. Mensa and a J. Every time she pushes a point, she looks to him first. And that coffee break, they were talking urgently until they saw me. Caldwell tapped his fingers on the seat rest. Which means someone here doesn't want this deal to go through. The question is, why? That evening, Caldwell suggested they skip the hotel restaurant and eat at a small seafood place by the coast. The salty breeze rolled in as fishing boats bobbed in the distance. Over grilled snapper and plantains, he leaned in. "Tomorrow I'll throw them a curveball," he said. Watch closely. The curveball came fast. The next morning session began with Caldwell casually announcing that the Lagos office had already begun preliminary work for the rollout, mock campaigns, digital assets, even early social media tests. It was a bluff, but only Sophia and Caldwell knew that. The effect was immediate. Mensa's eyes widened for a fraction of a second before narrowing. Ajay exchanged a quick, almost panicked look with him. One of the other executives frowned, as if confused. Caldwell kept talking, acting as though everything was perfectly normal. When the meeting broke for lunch, Mensa disappeared down the hall with his phone pressed to his ear. Sophia waited until he turned a corner, then quietly followed at a distance. He stopped at a far-end window, speaking in low English this time. "No, they're pushing ahead faster than expected." "Yes, I know." "No, it's not signed yet, but if they lock this in, it will cut into—" Sophia stepped back before he turned around, her pulse quickening. She didn't catch the rest, but she'd heard enough to know he was reporting to someone outside the company. Back in the conference room, she found Caldwell already reviewing documents. She leaned down, murmuring, "He's making calls about us, calls that aren't for this company." Caldwell's mouth tightened. "Then we won't waste any more time." That afternoon, he presented a revised deal structure, one that included stricter confidentiality clauses and a fast-track signing schedule. The other executives seemed intrigued, but Mensa's protests grew louder. "This is not how we do business here," he said sharply. "We need more deliberation. Or perhaps," Caldwell said evenly, "some of us simply need to decide which side we're on." The room fell silent. Mensa's face flushed, but he said nothing. By the end of the day, the tech firm CEO, who had been quiet through most of the discussions, asked to meet with Caldwell privately. Sophia waited outside the office, watching people pass in the corridor. 30 minutes later, Caldwell emerged, looking satisfied. "The CEO is aware of Mensa's extracurricular communications," he said quietly. "He'll handle it internally." That evening, back at the hotel, Sophia felt the weight of the last few days. Working with Caldwell meant constantly scanning for shadows in every room, subtle glances, half smiles, quick phone calls. And now she understood something important. The real battles didn't happen in loud arguments. They happened in the quiet, almost invisible moves people made when they thought no one was watching. The trip had been a success, but Sophia couldn't shake the thought. If these kind of games were happening at the top level in Accra, they were happening everywhere. And sooner or later, she'd have to face one much closer to home. The flight back to Lagos was quiet. Sophia sat by the window, staring at the faint line where the ocean met the sky. She replayed the Accra meetings in her mind, Mensah's sidelong glances, the hurried whispers in Twi, the phone call by the window. Every detail felt like a puzzle piece, but the bigger picture wasn't yet clear. Caldwell sat across the aisle, reading reports. He barely spoke during the trip. That was his style, always thinking 2 steps ahead, storing details like a chess player considering the next 5 moves. When they landed, the Lagos humidity wrapped around them like a heavy blanket. The company car took them straight from the airport to headquarters, where Sophia barely had time to drop her bag at her desk before she was summoned to Caldwell's office. He was already pacing when she entered. "We're not slowing down," he said without preamble. "The deal in Accra will close in our favor, but Mensah's interference confirms something bigger. I think he's part of a network." "A network?" she asked, sitting down. "Executives who trade inside information across borders. It's not just about sabotaging deals. It's about controlling which companies rise and which ones fall." Sophia's eyebrows drew together. "And you think it's connected here?" Caldwell stopped pacing. "I don't think. I know." The following morning, Caldwell called an early meeting with the Lagos senior team. Sophia sat quietly at the long table, scanning the faces. Some were familiar, others she'd only seen in passing. But she remembered Caldwell's warning. Sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one who barely speaks. The agenda seemed straightforward. Progress updates, upcoming campaigns, budgets. But halfway through, Caldwell shifted the tone. "There's been a series of leaks," he said. "Information leaving this office before it's officially released. I don't need to explain how damaging that can be." Several heads turned. One man, Adewale, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Sophia noticed. Caldwell continued. "So, moving forward, we'll be making changes to how sensitive material is handled. And I'll be personally overseeing any external communications on major projects." It was a shot across the bow. Nobody spoke. After the meeting, Sophia was heading back to her desk when she heard low voices near the elevators. Adewale was speaking to a woman from finance. "This is going to make everything harder," he muttered. "We can't operate like this." "Keep your voice down," the woman warned. Sophia didn't linger, but the exchange stuck with her. That afternoon, Caldwell handed her a stack of files. "These are expense reports and travel authorizations from the last 6 months. I want you to look for patterns, especially any meetings with companies we consider competitors." She spent hours combing through the numbers. Twice, she found expense claims for trips that didn't match official schedules. One was filed by Adewale, another by someone in the operations department. Both trips had been to Ghana. When she brought the findings to Caldwell, he nodded slowly. "That's the thread we pull." The next day, they staged a quiet test. Sophia prepared a dummy proposal for a supposed marketing deal with a fictional startup. The details were convincing but deliberately flawed, impossible to implement in real life. They leaked it internally, giving access only to 3 people, including Adewale. The goal was simple: see if the false information surfaced outside the company. It didn't take long. 2 days later, Caldwell received a discreet tip from a contact in another firm. The fake proposal had landed on their desk, forwarded from someone in the know. Sophia's heart raced. The test had worked. Now they knew the leak was coming from inside their own walls. The next step was riskier. Caldwell arranged a private dinner with the CEO, inviting Sophia along. They met at a quiet restaurant by the lagoon, where the lights of the city shimmered on the water. Over grilled fish and wine, Caldwell laid out the situation. The CEO listened without interrupting, her expression unreadable. When he finished, she spoke slowly. "This is serious. If they're trading our information, they're undermining more than just profits. They're controlling our future. Find me proof. Hard proof. Then we'll act." The proof came sooner than Sophia expected. 3 nights later, she was leaving the office late when she spotted Adewale in the parking garage. He wasn't alone. A man she didn't recognize was handing him a small folder. The exchange was quick. No words, just a nod before they walked in opposite directions. Sophia ducked behind a concrete pillar until Adewale's car pulled out. Her pulse hammered in her ears. She didn't have photos, but she had something better: timing. The next morning, Caldwell confronted Adewale in a closed-door meeting. Sophia sat in the corner, taking notes. "We know you've been in contact with competitors," Caldwell said evenly. "We've tracked travel records, communications, and document access. You can either explain yourself now or wait until board hears about it. Adewale's face drained of color. You're making a mistake, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Then prove me wrong, Caldwell replied. Silence. By the end of the day, Adewale was on leave pending investigation. Word spread quickly through the office, but nobody dared ask questions directly. That night, Sophia sat at her kitchen table, sipping tea and thinking. She had learned more in the last 2 weeks than in her entire career so far. Deals weren't just about products and prices. They were about trust, perception, and the quiet wars fought behind boardroom doors. And she had the uneasy feeling that the biggest war was still ahead. The heat that morning was heavy, pressing down on the city like a wet blanket. From the top floor, Caldwell's office gave a clear view of the streets below, yellow buses crawling through traffic, pedestrians weaving between honking cars, and occasional hawker balancing trays of snacks on their heads. But Caldwell wasn't looking at any of that. He was staring at a single sheet of paper on his desk. It was a printout of financial transfer, $8.5 million, moved quietly into a small consultancy firm that didn't seem to exist. Sophia had found it 3 nights earlier. They're getting bolder, she said, standing across from him. And whoever's behind this has people covering their tracks from the inside. Caldwell leaned back, tapping his pen against the table. Then it's time to smoke them out. That day was a blur planning. Caldwell called in a security firm, not the loud, uniformed kind, but 2 sharp-looking men in plain suits. They were trained to watch without being noticed. Sophia, meanwhile, built a list of every suspect. At the top was Mrs. Omalara from finance. She had a spotless reputation on paper, but Sophia had noticed a pattern. She always approved certain payments late at night, right after unrecorded phone calls. The break came on a rainy Wednesday evening. Sophia stayed late in the office, pretending to work on reports. At 8:43 p.m., she heard the elevator doors slide open. Footsteps approached, heels clicking on the tiles. She peeked out. Mrs. Omalara. The woman moved fast, a slim black briefcase in hand. She went straight to Caldwell's office. Sophia followed silently, stopping just before the doorway. Inside, Omalara unlocked Caldwell's personal cabinet, took out a document, and replaced it with another. She didn't notice the tiny security camera Sophia had hidden under the bookshelf 2 days earlier. The next morning, Caldwell reviewed the footage. His jaw tightened as he watched Omalara swap the files. We catch her today, he said, and anyone she's protecting. By noon, a private hotel conference room downtown was ready. Every suspect was invited under the pretext of an urgent strategic review. The room smelled faintly of new carpet and strong coffee. Caldwell opened the meeting calmly, clicking through slides of projected growth charts. Then he changed the screen. A still image from the hidden camera filled the wall. Mrs. Omalara, frozen mid-motion, holding the swap file. Murmurs swept through the room. Only 3 people had access to that cabinet, Caldwell said. And here is one of them, caught in the act. Omalara's face drained of color. This is not what it looks like. Caldwell cut her off. It's exactly what it looks like. And we have your bank records. For a moment, the air was thick with silence. Then she broke. I wasn't alone, she whispered. That was the trigger. Within an hour, 2 more names were confirmed, both mid-level managers feeding competitors for quick payouts. Security escorted all 3 out. No shouting, no drama. Just the sound of footsteps fading down the hall. By evening, the office felt different. Desks were busier, meetings were focused again, and the quiet unease that hung in the air for months began to lift. From his desk, Caldwell watched the sun sink behind the skyline. Sophia stood by the window. You've got your company back, she said. Caldwell smiled faintly. For now, but in business, peace is only borrowed. Sophia nodded. She understood. It was over for this round, but she would keep her eyes open, because in a world built on deals, trust was the rarest currency of all. If you like this story, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Also and other to strengthen our community. Let us know in the comments where you are watching from and what time you are currently watching this video.